Well, Happy New Year. It's 2021, and it's hard to believe the year has flown by. It's hard to believe we're already in the new year. And with the new year comes new stories, new inspirations, new motivations, of course, New Year's resolutions. And thankfully for this conversation, new stories that I think will illustrate magical people that will light you up. I'm Yogi Roth. It's the Yogi Roth Show podcast. Haven't been on in a little while, but it's because we've been working, and that's what the guest today is all about. It's Taylor Kavanaugh. You know him from previous podcasts. If you don't recall, I'll give you the brief bio. Former wide receiver, walk-on, earned scholarship at Oregon State, and now, to me, one of the most talented, in my opinion, the most talented storyteller and director. I've worked with the director, founder of the company Blue Ox Films, along with Matt Wilcox. Taylor, welcome back to the show, man. I cannot wait to dive into what we're going to talk about.
Yogi, appreciate you, man, to say the least.
Yes. All right, so let's jump right into it. The 11th of January, ladies and gentlemen, is the national championship. You all know that. Alabama, Ohio State. It's going to be a fun game. Taylor and I, we love college football. We'll be glued to that. But at 8 o'clock that night, wherever you live, at 8 o'clock on the CW network, we've got a special series, two-part special series airing, the first part. And it's a show called All American Stories. So, Taylor, I'd love you to give your brief description of it. I'll give mine, and we'll see where we net out.
Wow. Well, All American Stories is a passion project that has come to fruition. That, Yogi, to your credit, one of the many things Blue Ox and myself respects and appreciates about you as a storyteller, as a talent, is, man, when you grab on to an idea, your claws don't let go, maybe ever. And that relentlessness, that pursuit is not only what made this project happen, but is what, like I said, I respect innately about you, and what makes your projects and all the things that you touch turn to meaningful elements of story around sport and travel and all sorts of things. And this project was no different. What it was an initial idea that stemmed from your passions of Yogi's passions of travel, of sport, and most importantly, telling stories of telling meaningful stories in sport and life. And we originally created this concept of a show to go pitch around to various networks and platforms as that. And it landed through Yogi's manager and our producing partner, Jonathan Baruch, a connection that he had at CW Network. And they saw some really intrinsic value, both in the bones of the pitch that Yogi, Jonathan, and to a part myself provided, but I think most importantly, just the energy and passion that you had, Yogi, and I think that was innate in sort of the original concept. So that original concept of kind of a travel sport discovery style sort of show adapted in some meaningful ways to fall in line with a really exciting campaign and show that the CW was already having success with. That was the show All American, which was trending #1 on Netflix for a handful of months earlier this year, and is a story about a personal story about a journey of a football player in Los Angeles navigating a number of different dynamics as the character Spencer James went from a South Crenshaw High School to Beverly Hills, and then, potentially beyond. And that the root of All American, the scripted show, is a story about overcoming odds, overcoming many social challenges and dynamics to, find your way and have success in the sport of football. But it's much more meaningful beyond just that. And what Rick Haskins and Roman Brown and the team at CW commissioned us to do was take the inspiration of that scripted show All American and go out and find the actual stories similar to that were happening in the world today. And of course, that landed as a small documentary series of us, Yogi, myself, and the team going out and having this open palette of what are the real Spencer James stories out in the world of amazing athletes overcoming obstacles and hurdles, and how their stories are basically amazing feats of human achievement. And we did that, and that was kind of the impetus, and that's the high level brief on it. And man, it was a blast to say the least. And I know, Yogi, you can say as well, but the entire team around this sort of nucleus of this show, All American Stories, is super proud of the work.
Yeah, I was thinking back on this, and I agree with everything you said. And to give my version of that, I can remember when I left coaching, right? So we're talking 2009. And when I was in it, I was at USC, and you're in the heart of Hollywood. We were awesome. So I started producing all of our short pieces online. I started meeting agents and Hollywood types and going to acting class and being like, this storytelling thing is kind of cool. And of course you think, well, what story do I really want to tell? Like, where do I want to pour in? And this was when Bourdain was getting going. And you're like, this would be cool. And anyone in sports has thought of this. Let me be Bourdain for sports, right? Go around the globe, tell cool stories about people in sport, and of course, related to people in real life society. And that had been a vision of mine for a long time. And I go back on my laptop and I've got folders of different iterations of this show, different titles, different names, the whole thing, but basically the same essence. The form of it changed, whether it was a Word document or a PDF, or now finally we have a show that's video. But I've always thought of this. And then finally we connected, I don't know, call it like 2012 or something like that. And we're like, hey, let's see if we want to do a project a year. And to give you the background of Taylor and I, we were like, let's just do it. We'll see where we net out. So we would do sweat equity in pretty much a project every year. So these short little docs, right? There's one that is probably our collective favorite, which is What Does It Mean to Be Human, which is kind of fun that we're talking about that now. We did it on the day that the transition of power happened from President Obama to now Trump. And I look back on that and I was like, man, we did good work together. It was kind of like we were working, in the side field running routes, but we just didn't get our shot at a big game, a big stage. And here we went with this project that you just described, and we took it everywhere in LA, everywhere you can imagine. And everybody pretty much said the same thing. Love it, but you're not a big enough name, or you don't have somebody big enough attached, or you don't have enough YouTube subscribers, whatever it was, which is totally fair. Like, that's kind of the industry. And for a large part, this project was like, all right, well, like, what else does it have? And I think you and I collectively, as the walk-on in us, were like, no, it has a life. We know this is good. And to your credit, and Jonathan Brooks' credit, we kept pushing. Got the meeting at CW, and within 15 minutes, I could tell that Rick and Roman and their team were into it. It just had to take a different form. And now here we are. And from 8 digital episodes to now 2 hour-long specials on primetime television, I know we're stoked. And what I'm feeling so much now is not only just gratitude towards the CW for giving us a chance, but what we're doing, right? The show has taken its different form, and you all will watch this again. It's 8:00, wherever you are on the CW Monday night, and then it'll be on the CW Seed digital platforms. We got 8 short films, all inspirational stories about people overcoming incredible odds. But what I love now is that the stories we're telling, Taylor, like, they need to be told. Like, we're in a world, like, as we record this on January 7th, yesterday, you could argue in our lifetime was the worst day, one of the top 2 days that were the worst days in the history of our lifetime in this country, right? One being 9/11, 2 being the Capitol gets rushed. With that said, I'm reflecting last night and I'm like, America, like, what is America? And I can remember shooting this series with you in the pandemic, asking myself that same very question, what is going on in America? And sitting across some of our characters like Aziz Al-Shire, like Scout Bassett, some of the stories we'll get into that are in episode 1, and being like, you're America. Like, you're America. You define opportunity. You define going for it. You define the grit, resiliency, passion, perseverance, emotional intelligence, capacity, all the things that we love to talk about in this country that may not be definitely today like the cover of any newspaper. And I'm really proud of that now. I'm like, we met the moment, man. And this show met the moment, and our characters met the moment. So with that being said, out of the four, I want to just kind of focus on the four doc series or the characters that are in episode one. They are Aziz Al-Shire, Michelle Carter, Colin Obrady, and Scout Bassett. Give the audience, if you can, like, how do we get to four? Eventually we get to eight, but like, how did this thing even start for you guys of identifying and our team going out and being like, what's even a possible candidate for one of the 8 slots that we have?
Yeah, and Yogi, you know this. I love the execution of projects. Like, that's the zone that I love to live in as a producer, a director, just a person, humble person leading our team at Blue Ox, like telling these stories. Like, I love to live in that, and that's going to be, you know, and here in a sec, I'll share that, because it's wild how you start at 200 potential stories and you narrow it down through a variety of techniques to get it down to eight stories. But I think to respond to your thing first, that I think is important, is what was so meaningful to me about this project in these times of some, significant social upheaval in a number of different ways, the pandemic, unsureness for a lot of people. And, there's not enough of this, and our country would be less polarized perhaps, and a lot more understanding if this was the case. But there's a really foundational truth that I think exists. And it is, there's nobody that you cannot learn to respect, appreciate, and have love for if you hear the real essence of their challenge, their struggle, and their story. And when we live in this world of catchy sound bites or, tweets or, those things are easy to manipulate and twist and create a polarized environment. What is really hard to manipulate and twist and disagree with people and create hatred towards people is when you sit down with the ultimate humility and you ask them honest, meaningful questions to try to get to the deeper root of not just what do you believe on the surface level, but what are you about, to use your word, what's your essence. And filmmaking has an innate part of that, documentary filmmaking specifically, you have to do that, or what you create on the back end isn't really meaningful and is pretty surface level. And Yogi, you're one of the best people out, possible at doing that. But and I'd like to think that myself and my team are, fairly forward thinking, accepting people of all genders, races, creeds, et cetera, et cetera. But this project was just a really meaningful reminder of that when we sat in the room with 8 people from a variety of backgrounds that looked all different, that were from all different scenarios. And we asked them similar, meaningful questions, and to just sit and hear their stories for 2 hours in a raw, unfiltered way reminded me and inspired me, despite a really challenging circumstance just outside our door that interview was happening. And that was really meaningful. And that's, I think, one of many, many reasons why you said these are stories that are meaningful. And we're not remaking the wheel on any of these. We're simply just maybe asking better questions and having more humility amidst this wild environment that the world is currently spinning in. And I hope in a very small way, the best we can do, people watch these stories, and from the curation that we took from those 2-hour interviews in which we sat and lived in, and into these 6-minute documentaries, there's some little piece of that people are man, now I'm reminded of the goodness of people and how so many people overcome incredible odds, sometimes to use Scout's line just to get to the starting line. And I think that's really meaningful.
Yeah, it's so true. I know you got to follow up and answer the question I asked, but when I think of these, and as I've told friends, and I'll tell anybody listening, I think that as a parent, you'll get it. As somebody trying to figure out your life, you'll get it. I think I've watched every one of these with our 5-year-old, brought him on set, to one of them, and still his time with Leo Rogers, one of our characters, is one of his favorite moments of the year. Like, I really think at any age, and I think the best documentaries do this, they not only make you say, whoa, but they make you also reflect on your own life in real time, right? Like I know for me, when I sat across from Scout Bassett, who her story really impacted me in a bunch of levels around the idea of forgiveness, right? To give you the broad brushstrokes. As a newborn, she lost her leg in a fire, and then her parents dropped her off on the front doorstep of an orphanage in China. It was a state-run orphanage. For 7 years, she did not see sunlight. She did not watch television. She did not see a book. And nobody attended to her missing leg. So she built her own prosthetic. She literally picked herself up off the ground out of a leather belt, masking tape, and nuts and bolts. From that point, as she got fostered to America at 14 years old, she was at 8 years old, she was 22 pounds. 22 pounds, 8 years old, 22 pounds, right? You come out of the womb like 11, 12 pounds, right? To be fair, sometimes. And when she finally got a running prosthetic at 14 years old, she was crying at the starting line, to Taylor's point of how do I get to the starting line? And she was forced to run in a race. And she ran in the race and came in dead last. But as she ran, tears were streaming down her face. She said the shackles of her life kind of fell off. She ended up going to UCLA, being one of the top athletes in the country. And now she's the fastest woman in America on the 100-meter dash in the Paralympic Games. And when I sat across from her, it was the same day that college football got canceled in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. We didn't think we were going to play. And I remember thinking like, oh man, like I'm not going to have a job. Like, how am I going to feed this family? Like, life is tough right now, right? And then I sat down with Scout, and she had many powerful lines, but one of them, she said, all you got is all you need. And when she said that to me, Taylor, I was like, yeah, we're good. I wrote it down. It's still on my desk right now. I call my wife immediately. I tell our sons that all the time. All you got is all you need. And she didn't have much perceptually, but it was all she needed. And now look at what she's doing. And her story has many more layers than the brief ones I just described. But I really think that in real time, when you watch these, you'll start to think about, like, when did I get to the starting line? Am I at the starting line? How am I operating at the starting line per Scout Bassett? And I think every single one of these will do that to you. And that's what I think the great stories do. And you did that as the director, right? Like, we all found these stories. You and your team and all of us collectively, this was a great shared effort, pared them down. But after I did 2 hours of interviewing where I went everywhere, you went like, okay, how are we going to shape this thing? You know, it's like having a roster full of a bunch of talent. Like, what plays are you going to run and run well? So I want to hear like how the specific stories impacted you, but I also want you to take us into like the directorial mind and how you found Scout Bassett, who could fill 2 hours. She could fill 10 episodes, but for us, she fills a 6-7 minute window.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge and the beauty and the pull your hair out frustration, but the redeeming moments. Like that's what filmmaking is all about. That's the fun of it, particularly documentary filmmaking. It's like trying to, making a documentary, any documentary, is like trying to saw down a tree with dental floss. Like, it just feels like you're just, at every step, but there's beauty in that too. There's the discovery of it. So it's a series of, like, I guess, working with our amazing team, Matt, my business partner, Neil Peterson, who was the editor, Connor Kelsey, one of our camera operators, our core team, and then the, dozens of people that worked on this project beyond that. Like, this is, our editor, Neil, spent like 1,500 hours legitimately on this project in the edit room. Like, that's what it takes to make, 8 short documentaries. It's insane. Plus thousands of hours beyond that. Robbie Colan's the production manager. Like, I mean, this is a true team effort. And I mean, it's like, it's thankless at some points, but like, you're doing it in, I think all of us are driven by like that feeling that maybe some only filmmakers understand, that the moment you release something that is a powerful story that does justice to the story of the person that you're trying to like, lift up in ways and share their perspective on the world and share their, their insane ups and downs, like that makes the hard work worth it. So how do you go about, to your initial question, like selecting these stories? I think, well, we made a master Google Doc, and we, from our, existing sports mind, like just listed every single story we've ever heard that was meaningful. And then beyond that, like doubled that by discovering new stories. Robbie Colan's, our production manager, was literally like reaching out to hundreds of like high schools, all over LA, Florida. Like, what's the best story you've ever heard of involving like high school, college, or professional athlete? Like, I mean, it was boots on the ground, like roll your sleeves up work like that. And then we landed on these 8, that 4 are going to be in the first primetime TV special, 4 are going to be the next. And like Yogi said, like all 8 will be released on CWC, their digital network. And the act of creating these was challenging, like I said, all at the same time. But, Yogi, to your genius, I mean, our editors and us, like we sat in the edit room first looking at all this footage and just sat in awe at the power of like what we had just in the raw footage, and that's a whole filmmaking editing masterclass, how you take 2 hours of footage and like you make that into a 5-minute spot. I mean, it's like doing a 3,000 piece puzzle in reverse, with like no instructions. But I mean, what you did in the interview room, like to set up, and the prep work that you did beforehand, like determining those stories, like everything is like, adding a layer to the story about where it's going. And like, as you add each layer, if the layers are like off course, like you create this tilting, incorrect thing that eventually topples over. But like throughout each course of the filmmaking process, like if your foundational layer is plumb and flat and sturdy and strong, and then you build the next layer, like the prep for the interview, and then you build the next layer, like the interview itself, and then you build the next layer of editing or like the scripting process. Like you think about like building those blocks on top of each other, and then when you have those blocks like assembled, it's then that you can like carve out the real shape of the story from that like amassed and aggregated stone on top of one another. And that's kind of the easy part, is like once you get all the pieces in place, like, okay, now what do we cut and add back, and how do we shape this and craft this in a way with music and sound and visuals and all that stuff to like create the most impactful sort of emotional moments that do justice to the story. But, it's not just decide the story, then sit down and edit it. There's like, hundreds of steps and time and money and plane flights and like meals and negotiations and haggling and like last minute rushes and like camera prep. I mean, there's thousands of things that go into it, and that's the stress, but that's also the beauty of any project, for any filmmaker. And of course, we weren't able to avoid any of that anxiety or challenge or beauty in this project either. So, there's a lot to that, but it was a beautiful, meaningful process on this for sure. That was certainly a team effort.
So speaking of a team effort, how did you make sure that your team navigated through COVID-19? Because to be fair, and Kevin Carroll, our mutual friend, and I call him my board of life, he said when the pandemic hit, he goes, Yogi, there is power in the pause. There's power in the pause. And you and I are not of the mind of, okay, shut down. Like it was shut down, pause, find the power in it, pivot, the show's going to happen. So how did you make sure that we navigated those waters with your team?
I hesitate to speak in any absolutes, hardly ever, because there are very few absolutes in this world around us, even though sometimes we're led to believe that, I think. First and foremost, like, our team, our Blue Ox team, like, there was a significant pause, as there was for everybody in this, because safety and the gravity of a worldwide pandemic is like nothing to, nothing to second guess. Like there's grave examples of like not approaching our current world safely, and like the outcomes are not pretty. And, and that's, as we all know, has been the gravity of this situation. And in anything that we're doing production wise in this environment, like that is the number one thing, like human being safety that are working on these projects is number one. So there's like dozens and dozens of safety protocols that we've adapted to, as have many production companies in the industry, to make sure things are done safely. And that's one side. I also think the other side is that, given that you can produce content safely, I believe that you should, because there's also people's well-being. This is a economic activity as well as it is a filmmaking activity. And, our team, people that we're hiring, the talent, like these are all, I think people also need the economic movement and like all the things that come along with that at the same time. So this felt meaningful if we could, which we did, strike a balance between safety and like wanting to like support people through this work. And also, like we've already established, like just telling meaningful stories in this time. So how did we go about doing that? Well, there's literally thousands of separate, steps and strategy that we implemented to do this safely. But, at the highest level, it was doing this in a very lean way. This is a project that could have had, 20 people on set at any one time or any one shoot. We did it with 4. We did it with all the basic stuff that we've already heard. Like, you're not coming close to other people. You're shooting all this stuff in a socially distant way. We're, testing for COVID hundreds of times during the course of this production with anybody that ever got close to the production itself, and many, many more things. But, our team, our Blue Ox team, I have a personal, I guess, approach that I think innately filmmaking is more authentic and real if it's done in a lean way. That is to say, like, there's not 100 people standing around, even though each of those people on many productions have very important jobs. Like in a lot of situations, like I stress the team in a way of like, okay, you like, we should do this with 8 people. Like, let's do it with 4. And even though we're going to give some significant things up in that process, what we're going to gain is that space between the camera and the talent. Like, we'll feel their comfort level and their anxiety levels like go down and give us something more authentic, because it feels smaller and it feels more real. Like, that's something that Blue Ox, our team, has always done, but we had to really embrace and do more in this, like in the last year of making content. And I think this is a good example that, when things that are initially seem like a challenge or a hurdle, like you kind of embrace and say, and that's the essence of a true creative mind, right? Like being able to like say, here's something that's given to me as a negative, as a challenge. Like, how can I spin that and embrace that and like come out the other end with something that actually, in some ways, like you gave some things, but you got some, others, and it became an advantage. And I think in this case, because we embraced it and we said, bar none, we're going to do this safely. And on this production, there were 0 transmitted, COVID cases, like nobody tested positive at all ever. So I think there was success in that realm. But because we embraced like this challenge of doing it lean and, doing it on a budget and all those things and doing it safely, like we're able to come out with, I think, some really personal, organic, authentic content that I think hopefully people feel on screen. Like the stuff is real. And I think part of that was adapting to this really unique environment, challenging in many ways, but trying to use it in some ways to our advantage. So there's a lot more there, obviously, but I think that's the highest level approach that we took.
I remember our first one was Colin Obrady. And if you don't know Colin, please go to Instagram and just put in his name, and you will go down an amazing rabbit hole of what he's currently doing and what he's all about, which, Taylor, I'm going to let you get into in a minute. But he was our first interview, and it was in June. And we had, obviously, the pandemic initially hit mid-March. It was heavy. And to your point, we all did hit pause. And then it was like, okay, how are we going to try to do this? And I drove up to Portland. My wife was 8.5 months pregnant, kind of like ready to deliver a baby any day. And we made the collective agreement, like, go before instead of right after. for obvious safety purposes. So I'm driving up in a rental car. I've never driven up to Portland from Los Angeles, and I'm going up the coast, and I'm like, I wonder how this is going to look. Like, they've sent me like some initial sketches of what the set will be, but like, how are we going to do this in 6 feet? Right. Cause initially, like, it was like, I thought I'd be walking with somebody. I'd be in their environment, right? When I was with a surfer, we'd be in the water. When I was with a hiker, I'd be on a mountain. And now, like, all right, how are we going to go do this? And I remember pulling into your studio the morning we interviewed him, and you're like, dude, it's going to be great. Don't worry. The set looks awesome. And I walk into your office, and there it is, this beautiful like oak table. It's beautifully lit, and it was 6 feet apart, but man, did it feel intimate. Man, did it feel intimate. And we created the environment of the interview to feel like almost like a podcast, right? So you walked into somebody's podcast studio, and you might be 6 feet apart. But it never felt that way. And I love that about it, of not only, of course, everybody was COVID-19 safe and protected and masked up, the whole 9 yards up until we started. And then me and the subject, we would take ours off and away we'd go. But how I think you curated the space to feel like I was right next to Colin Obrady, let alone any of our other characters, to me was awesome, man. And every place we went to, whether we went to Florida and Tampa or went to Dallas, every environment felt that way, and it was a different building. And I just think that so much of the time we're like, well, just let me talk to him, at least as like an interviewer. Just let me talk to the person. I'll make it great. But the fact of the matter is the way that it looked, and the safety and the comfort that every character felt when they walked in, I felt. They were just at ease. Yeah. And then it was on me to make them feel even more at ease with the questions we would ask. But yeah, man, that was just laughing back. I was like, man, I remember driving up there being like, how the heck are we going to do this thing? And away we went.
I think it's safe to say that we obviously did some things differently. I think we would have done, we would have taken some bigger swings in some ways, the way we were producing and setting up scenes and everything. But, I think the choice to like make sure that it was maybe slightly more controlled than we were initially imagining in like the very early creative, a little bit more controlled and a little bit slower in pace to make sure that we could control like who was where and what was happening. I think that was the right call, given, the safety outcome of everything, and the fact that, it's one of those things the viewer never knows. Like, I think a lot of, directors, filmmakers, on-air individuals, like we really like, and that's that's the good and the bad of like the world that we live in with making any project, is that, we stress over the stuff that, the smallest things. And while that creates a great project, like part of it, you have to ground yourself in like the viewer never knows what hits the cutting room floor, or the viewer never knows like, what something could have been. They know what the end outcome is. And like, if you net out that it's an impactful project, like you have to be okay with some of those trade-offs that are innate, in the course of any project or production. And you can't let like one small trade-off in the beginning, like derail the project. Even if you're like kind of worked up about it, like I really wanted that thing. If you have the ability and the overall vision to like say, this is bigger than this one thing, then you can allow the rest of the cascading decisions after that to be from like a solid place to like continue to move it forward. So I think this project innately had some of that for all the reasons we've just talked about. But very proud of, you, our team, like all the people involved with this, to like have the vision and leadership and, executional abilities to like see this thing through in a worldwide pandemic amidst like lots of other stuff and things. And, proud of that, the fact that it was safe and successful.
Cool. All right. Last couple of questions. We'll get out of here. You had been talking about Colin Obrady to me for years. Tell us about his story. His film is titled Finding Your Everest.
Yeah, Colin and I are close acquaintances, friends. We've done a couple other things together, and we actually went to the same high school, although Colin was a couple years older than I, Lincoln High School here in Portland, Oregon. And to put it simply, you can find out, many things about Colin's achievements and what he does with a simple Google search, or like you said, I won't tell you what he's doing, but, he's done a number of things that no other humans have done before in the exploration space on the planet. And he's currently in the middle. He's probably freezing his ass off right now on the mountain that you can go discover that he's climbing. But to me, Colin is an individual that operates on a different human wavelength. Like, the things that he does, the explorations that he goes out on, and kind of what he does in tangent to that, trying through his nonprofit, like, trying to inspire and teach kids through some of the things that he's doing is like really cool. And, and like I said, he's just a human, chasing achievement on like, he's jumped up to like the next wavelength, like, and his brain just works in a different way. And obviously he's like a physical presence to physically do the things that he's doing. But, I have a lot of respect for the things that he's done and how he simply goes out amidst like, and cuts through the noise of people and obstacles and everything to achieve what he wants to do. And, I have a lot of respect for him and all people who do that. And like one of Colin Obrady's main messages is like, 0.001% of people that hear his message are actually going to climb Mount Everest or like, that sort of thing. But his message to the name of our title of the film on him that we collaborated with him on in this series was, finding your Everest. And, his message is, you might not have any desire to climb Mount Everest or row across the Drake Passage or be the first to do any of these things that he's done. But like, you can apply that to many different things in your life. Your Everest might be, having a child, or it might be, being at home with your children, or it might be becoming a CEO or anything. And like, the things that he's done to prepare himself to like do these monumental physical feats. Like, I think he works to like convey those through a very active social media presence. And he's a best-selling author and some of those things to help people is maybe pursue giving people some small amount of a toolkit to like approach their lives in that way that's proved to be successful for him. So the story that we did on him for this series embodied that and kind of told some of the challenges that he's been through in his life and some of the things that he's done. And I think it was pretty cool. So,
yeah, he's amazing. I mean, truly one of the greatest adventurers in our lifetime on planet Earth. This is a guy who was burned in a fire badly in Thailand when he was in his early 20s and was told by a team of doctors, you might never walk again. Mm-hmm. And not only has he walked a few places, he's walked literally across Antarctica solo, unassisted, let alone all the peaks in the world and what he's doing currently right now. So I love that story. So I want to get you out on this. Was there a moment? We have always believed in this series, always believed in it, right? From jump. I can remember being at my old place 3 apartments ago, sitting up late at night being like, what do we want to do? Let's go for it. Just being like, we're not going to back down. Like, why not us? So we knew this would work in terms of being able to create something like this. But was there a moment when you were either on set or watching something back where you were like, yeah, we got something?
I mean, I knew it was going to be good from the very start. I think the moment was like, here's how I think about that is maybe it's myself, maybe it's an abundance of being overly optimistic, or maybe it's like too much like internal bravado or confidence, I suppose. But like, I knew that we were going to make really, really meaningful, incredible stories and hopefully, people receive them that way. But I didn't ever think that was not going to be the case. Like, I knew that was going to be the case because we have a badass team of people here. Yogi Roth is a badass like storyteller and like can draw that out of people. And like, we had some really cool support from the CW as a partner, as a client, as a network. So all those pieces were in place, and we had support from Jonathan and many, many other people. So I was never surprised at any one point, like, to be honest, of like, this is going to be good. Because of that, I think it was just like with any project, I think more of the questioning is like, are we ever going to get through, this monumental pile of work that we have to do to take it from like 8 ideas, or even earlier than that, 200 potential stories, down to like 8 highly refined, crafted, air ready, films. Like that's always the question. I think every single project, any single story can be award winning, can be impactful. It's just like the work and the decisions you have to go through to get it there. And at some point it it can get derailed, or it can continue to amplify in the power. And I think that's where it was. But, if there was one moment that was like confirming that like these stories are going to have like the gravitas that I think we all want them to have, I think once we hit the editing room, that was it was just inevitable, given that our team, we all put in the work to do it. Like they were going to be really good. But I think backing up, like the point where it was like, okay, now I'm the first checkpoint, I guess, was like when we nailed down and we confirmed the 8 amazing stories and individuals from all corners of the US and in part the globe committed to like being a part of the project. That's it. I think the 2 most important parts of any project is like the team you have alongside you, check, and like what the story is, or who the people are, who the talent is attached or like committed to the project. And the stories of, Scout, Michelle, Colin, Aziz, like when we had the last piece of paper in hand of like these 8 people are signed and committed to this project, like at that point, that was kind of a first, albeit short, temporary celebration, like good job team, back to work sort of moment of like, we have potential for like telling really amazing, authentic stories that aren't just like, we're not just phoning this one in of like, trying to make something out of nothing. We're making something out of something. Like that was a cool moment, followed by the thousands of hours of work after that.
Yeah, I love that. 1,005 hours in the edit room by Neil. Big props to you, man.
Yeah.
I did have a moment. Because I remember our first interview, right? It was Colin, as we just referenced. And Colin is a larger than life figure. And I've been around a lot of those people like you have. We've interviewed them before. And they have a presence about them when they walk into a room. And he did. And we have presence about ourselves, I'm sure, when we walk into rooms. And one of the characteristics is we're over the top prepared. So I felt awesome going into it. Like we went on a run the morning of into wherever we were in Portland. I don't know. I forget I've never been there before, but it was a nice little trail run.
Yeah.
And
Forest Park.
There we go. And, we connected to our roots. And I love the phrase roots and reach, right? Like we're connected to our roots. We love being outdoors. Clearly Colin does. And we're going to reach for stuff, right? Colin reaches for things all the time. He's doing one right now. You and I in our respective lives do. And I was going to go for it. Like I was never going to sit across somebody and give them a layup. It's just not my style. I'm not confronting. I'm not challenging, but I'm going to make you go deep. And I remember talking to him. And I think my first question to Colin Obrady was, so why do you think you're alive? And I remember him looking at me like, oh, it's on. Okay. Yeah. And as the interview went on, like I obviously settled in and felt really good about it. He's incredible as a speaker. That's just a gift of his. And at the very end, I didn't know if this was going to work. And I think as an athlete, something I've always had to compete to do is to trust myself, right? Instead of just being like the overworked, overprepared wide receiver who wanted a scholarship, I had to, at some point as an athlete, trust myself that I knew what I was doing. It's always been hard for me. Same thing as a broadcaster, same thing as a storyteller. And there's some point in my career in every one of those individual divisions where I've said, yeah, just cut it loose. Right? If I'm calling a game right now, I don't prepare what I'm saying in the open. I just cut it loose. Like I trust that it's there. If I'm interviewing somebody, I trust that it's there. But on this series, I was presented with my first opportunity to either trust myself or do what was safe. And it was at the end of the interview. And this was an idea that I made up on the run. And I kind of loosely told you it, but I didn't want to really tell anybody. And I went outside of your office and I picked up a pebble and I put it in my pocket. And I had read something about Colin talking about how when he looks at something like Mount Everest, how he looks at it as a bunch of tiny little rocks stacked up on one another.
Yeah, which it is.
Which it is. But you look at it, and any of us who've seen Everest, I remember being in Nepal. I remember seeing big mountains like that. And you're like, damn. Or if our kids saw it, they'd be like, whoa, Dad, that is huge, right? And I never really thought of it like that. So late in the interview comes, and it's kind of that time for the crescendo. And I can't just end on a weak note. I got to the dramatic in me has to finish strong. And I reach into my pocket, I lean to my left, and I pull out this little pebble, and I slide it across the table. And I asked him, I said, what does this represent? And he was on it, and he knew it, and he nailed it. And he gave this great answer that finishes his short film in our documentary series. You could see Monday night on the CW at 8 o'clock, or DVR if you want to watch it after the national championship game. And I just remember in that moment, like all of me was smiling inside. It was like the greatest smile of like, you trusted your gut. Like you had this little instinct that said, ask it, pull out the rock. And then the subconscious was saying, I don't know, you've done a good job. This is solid. We got everything we need, like it might bomb. Don't go there. And I was like, screw it, bro. Like I'm going for it. Like throw me the ball or let me have that interview or let me have that moment. And I'll just always remember that from the first question to the last one of when that interview ended. He walked in as such a stoic, badass pro. And he walked out being like, and I remember him texting me after it, and of course you being like, that was one of the most enjoyable interviews I've ever had.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, okay, if he's saying that, not only did Taylor and I believe in this, and Jonathan and Rick and Roman and our team, but like this shit's on. And that was cool. Like to drive up there, I had a baby on the way, like everything was kind of perfect in my own little film in my brain. And to finish on that note, I was like, oh, look out. Like this thing is gonna be dope.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, you crushed it on that one. And we used that answer in the film, as you alluded to. Like, that was a great moment. Okay.
All right. A great moment is going to be January 11th. I've said it once. I'm saying it again. Episode 1, it's Aziz Al-Shire, San Francisco 49ers linebacker. He grew up homeless in Florida. His home burned down, and the rest of his story is magical. Second one is Michelle Carter. It's titled Strength and Beauty. She is the only female in this country to win a gold medal in the shot put. But what's much more impressive is that she's created a confidence camp titled You Throw Girl. She's embraced her own persona. Her nickname is the Shot Diva. Find her on Instagram, social media. She's going to light you up. Colin and Scout, we talked about Colin Obrady and, of course, Scout Bassett. They're the final two. And kind of the cherry on top is that this show is with me and Spencer Paysinger as our co-hosts. Right, the former Oregon linebacker, NFL linebacker, of course, All-American. The series, the scripted, award-winning series is what his life is based on. And to sit next to him and listen to him unearth who he is for the first time on national television, because there's so many questions and I think assumptions that some are right, some are wrong. We clarify those as in between every film. He not only reacts, but he also unearths layers of him. And of course, season 3 of the scripted show All-American. So I'm pumped, man. I think we got a lot of cool elements coming on Monday night.
That's for sure. That is absolutely for sure.
I love it. All right, so that's Taylor Kavanaugh. We'll come back and do it again before episode 2, which will air February 1st. This podcast, thanks for subscribing and listening to it. It's all about humanity in sports. We love college football. That's how we get in. But this series for us as college football players, and Spencer as well, the three of us all played in the pack. Or excuse me, all were part of the pack. I didn't play in the pack. I probably wasn't good enough. I coached in the pack. But it's a cool connection. So we appreciate the support. Set your DVR. If you miss it, it'll all be online the very next day on the CWC and CW.com. So all those links will eventually be in the show notes, or follow us on social media. He's Taylor Kavanaugh. I'm Yogi Roth. And I hope you enjoy the show. I guess I'll leave it at that. Peace.